Inside, we move to the main event of the day, which is whether or not the Prime Minister will survive Tory conference. Now, Liz Truss, as I said, will be giving her keynote speech today, hopefully not in a high-vis jacket, less than a month after taking over and after the most disastrous 4 weeks that anyone can remember a Prime Minister having. The Queen died, the pound tanked, a screeching U-turn on the budget did nothing at all to reduce the increased mortgage rates lots of voters are now having to pay as a result. Now, Lizzie, this was supposed to be her coronation, this conference. She was supposed to swan in, be applauded by the party faithful and her MPs as their third female prime minister. It hasn't really turned out like that, has it?
No, I mean, if you'd said a couple of weeks ago that we would be where we are now, I don't think I'd have believed it. At the start of September, Truss had spent the summer doing all of these different hustings. She stormed ahead in the leadership race against Rishi Sunak. Everyone, she was the darling of the Tory party. Everyone was sort of saying, all Conservative members were really excited about her. And, coming forward to now, where I've never seen a Conservative conference like this, and talking to colleagues who've been in Westminster for a lot longer than I have, there's not really a parallel for something like the discipline in the party has totally fallen apart. We started conference with this U-turn on the 45p top rate of income tax, which they'd said that they weren't going to U-turn on. And the Chancellor had even briefed the papers at 10 p.m. On Sunday night that wasn't going to happen. So once that happened, it sort of triggered a series of just extraordinary interventions from all over the party. Serving cabinet ministers, arguing yesterday, what the Home Secretary accused some of her colleagues of mounting a coup. It's pure chaos here. Everywhere you go, there are people briefing, bitching about each other, panicking, and it's just an extraordinary atmosphere. It's very interesting.
You absolutely love it.
Yes, we do. Yeah, I have to say.
In the last sort of few years, the chaos has been very much in the Labour Party, and going to Labour conference was a bit like that. This Labour conference, I know that lots of the political journalists from all sides were going, this is so boring. They're really professional. They've really got it together. No one's giving us anything. This is rubbish. And then Tory conference happens, and yay, the chaos junkies all get their high again. And I think to some extent it's probably played out in the rest of the country as well. We want this kind of drama. We're so used to it now. Now, Mike says, morning, Mike. At least Simon Brodkin waited until Theresa May was on stage before handing her the P45. Tory MP's been doing this to Liz Truss all week. Simon Brodkin is, of course, the japester, I suppose is the best way to describe him, who handed Theresa May in 2017 her P45 on the stage, which I think was the same year that the stage fell down and she got a frog in her throat and everything just went horribly, horribly wrong.
That was a bad conference, but not as bad as this. That speech was a disaster, but, the days leading up to it weren't like this. But
Theresa May, was considered a bit wooden and robotic, but Liz's speeches are things of historical significance. They're so bad. The pork market's one, the disgraceful cheese. She's not brilliant at delivery. You and your colleagues are going to be sitting there waiting for the meme, aren't you, to pop up?
I would have thought so. I think, on a serious note, it is a really important moment for her. People are going to be watching, really scrutinising absolutely everything she does. Obviously, people the journalists are going to be watching for any gaffes, anything stupid, any awkward moments, which she's known for. But also, obviously, for a sense of what kind of direction they're taking, because there's been all these promises that they're not going to U-turn, that they're not going to change on this, but already things are starting to disintegrate a bit. And so we kind of need to get a sense of where she's going to go forward from this, and what kind of tone she's going to take with her own party, with her MPs, and whether she can, whether this speech is a sign that she can turn things around or not.
Yeah, and what I'm quite keen on seeing is how the pound reacts every time she says something. If only there was some way that the Mirror video team could actually have, instead of the caterpillar of public opinion polls along the bottom of the screen, actually have the sterling up and down as she's speaking. It'd be quite interesting. I think the City Traders probably want her to do something like that. We are going to be watching it live later on this channel, so make sure you come back and have a look. We have the stream that's going to be on here. I keep asking us your questions. What do you think Liz should be saying in her speech? What would you like to hear? Obviously, don't just say resignation, please. But is there something serious you want her to do? Now, as I was saying, this is supposed to be her coronation, but it's actually more like a death march, Lizzie, because there's a lot of MPs staying away, not least because most of them didn't vote for her, but they also don't want to be ambushed by journalists as they walk around the venue. There's also lots of activists apparently not completely thrilled by the new ministers. And we've got a little video here of Therese Coffey, the health secretary, addressing the conference yesterday. There they are. Isn't that they've obviously been living it large the night before, and they've got a serious dose of conference flu. They're not exactly invigorating the crowds. The party faithful are not hopping up and down going, great, we've got a true Tory prime minister, in quite the same way the Daily Whale has been doing, are they?
No, there's a very strange atmosphere. It almost feels a bit like people are slightly resigned to the fact that this might be it, that it's basically over, that they've had 12 years and that they're probably not going to win the next election. Like, I went to a really interesting panel event on Sunday with a woman called Rachel Wolfe, who co-wrote the 2019 Conservative Manifesto. And in it, she sort of basically said, I don't think there's any way the Conservatives can win in 2024. And so did another pollster on the panel called James Johnson, who also used to work in Downing Street. They were both just saying, I don't see a way that they can recover from this. They've not got a mandate, all of this. And the audience sort of just sat there, like no one really booed or like raised any concern about it. They all just sort of sat there and took it. And because I think some of them are already starting to see that they're concerned that they're probably not going to win. And I think the contrast, as you were saying, from Labour conference in Liverpool, we've had a few quite chaotic Labour conferences over the years, but the one last weekend was incredibly professional. It was, hardly any gaffes, hardly anything went wrong. And the atmosphere there was really different. It was that, people almost couldn't believe that actually Powell looked like suddenly it was in grasp for the first time, and that there were all these business people there. There was loads of money swirling around that conference, loads of, like ambassadors trying to get tickets to, with the Mirror party, which is always a good night, but not something necessarily that ambassadors want to come to, as a sign that power is shifting.
Maybe ambassadors get a sudden attack of taste. That happens too. It's not all Ferrero Rocher. Now, Leslie says, will she be calling for a general election in her speech? As you were saying, Lizzie, she doesn't have a mandate for what she's doing. A lot of the stuff, as Nadine Dorries, the lunatic Nadine Dorries, has quite sensibly pointed out, the stuff that they were elected on in 2019 is stuff she's throwing out the window. And the stuff that she's suggesting and stuff in the budget speech, the tax cuts, are not what they were voted in to do. So her majority depends entirely on Boris Johnson's promises, which she's abandoned. How long is that going to be sustainable for?
That's the big question. We really don't know, because the 2019 manifesto is like where the Tories are now, it's unrecognisable. And Liz Truss is obviously, because of the system that the Conservatives have, where because they're in power, they're able to elect a new leader without going to the country. You've got a situation where Liz Truss has been elected without having to fight a general election through a really small number of the Conservative membership is a very small proportion of the general public. And not only that, she didn't even get a majority of MPs when that contest was happening, because they whittle it down. They do MPs down to a final 2, and then they go to members. So Rishi Sunak won more MP support than she does. So she doesn't have a majority of support amongst her own party in Parliament, and she doesn't have a majority in the country because the public voted for Boris Johnson's, sort of levelling up, getting Brexit done, public spending, like that sort of thing. There was nothing about tax cuts in that. And so it becomes incredibly difficult, because you go to the public and you say, you voted for me for this, but I want to do something completely different, and I'm not asking your permission. And also you say to the MPs who are like, we didn't vote for this. And then you even have the Tory electorate who voted for her on a manifesto that, yes, was about tax cuts, but didn't include half of the things that she's talking about now. So she's making it up, basically.
Exactly. some of the stuff they voted for perhaps had been brought in a different way, a bit more slowly, a bit more considered, one thing at a time. You might have got what you asked for, but doing it all at once. Nah.
Yeah.
Now,
You've got to take people, you've got to try and explain to people why you're doing things. And I think, they keep saying, oh, maybe we had a bit of a comms problem or whatever. And it's like, well, yes, you've just suddenly, you've panicked everyone, the markets, you've panicked everybody because you've not explained anything about what you're doing. And I think in her speech today, she's supposedly going to try and say, try and explain a bit about what she's doing. But the words we were given last night, are not, I wouldn't say particularly reassuring. They say, a little bit of disruption is necessary for change, which I think people who are staring down the face of, have lost their mortgage deals, are like really struggling on loads of different issues, are going to think that disruption doesn't sound that good. And also she says that everyone's going to benefit from the economic growth that she says is going to happen. But there's no explanation of how.
No, or indeed where, in fact, it's coming from. It's mad because in the last few years we've sort of been on a bus being driven wildly out of control by a succession of prime ministers. The first one took us down the wrong path into austerity, which caused growth to collapse. Then the one after that was trying to deal with someone else stealing the wheel in terms of Nigel Farage and careered off the road entirely. Boris Johnson cut the brakes. And now actually we're at the point where Liz Truss has taken over the bus and Boris Johnson suddenly seems like a calm and sensible pair of hands, which is an astonishing situation to be in. And yesterday, like you said, we had Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, criticising other cabinet ministers and other MPs and saying they've staged a coup trying to bring down the Prime Minister. And we had Kwasi Kwarteng blaming the fact his budget was such a disaster on the fact the Queen had the bad timing to die just before he was about to do it, as though that's me. I didn't do my maths or check my sums because the Queen died and I was so busy laughing at her funeral that I couldn't actually do the homework that I was supposed to do. It's not the kind of excuse that really wins any fans over, especially in the Conservative Party, which has got a lot of quite serious, wealthy people who can do sums in its ranks who don't like this. Have we had sort of a collapse of collective responsibility, you think? Because the government's got all this infighting going on, and that normally happens at the end of a government, not at the start.
Yeah, it's totally fallen apart. I mean, and not just in one direction. They're all fighting each other all the time. Like, it's sort of, the dam sort of broke yesterday when Penny Mordaunt, who's the leader of the House of Commons, criticised the government's path on, because they're talking about basically not uprating benefits in line with inflation, which means effectively a real times cut for people on benefits. And Penny Mordaunt and a number of other people said this wasn't right. Other people started weighing in on other sides. Jacob Rees-Mogg's been wandering around, sort of just criticising random bits of government policy. Like yesterday, he was having a go at the junk food, that some of the junk food strategy, and saying that people should be allowed to have Terry's chocolate oranges at checkouts, and that the public should go and put them back there because they were removed to try and stop people from buying them. It's mad. Like, I don't know, he was just wandering around saying that stuff. And then you've got quite an interesting cohort of sacked ministers, lots of whom were quite loyal to Rishi Sunak, like Michael Gove, who are all over the place, just like stirring things up, criticising the government, who are very experienced and command respect across the party. So yeah, it's pure chaos.
Marvellous. Now, Angela says, who's going to put Cruella Braverman on the first plane to Rwanda on a one-way ticket? The Home Secretary was filmed at a Fringe event yesterday saying that her dream was planes taking off to Rwanda. She didn't mention whether there'd be any migrants on board. But to answer your question, Angela, seeing as Cruella Braverman is not fleeing war and in desperate need of help, she wouldn't be on the plane to Rwanda. So no. Now, Leslie says, will Truss be able to explain how we can have economic growth when she's taking money from the people who would create that growth? The argument, as far as Truss is concerned, Lizzie, is that only the wealthiest people are the ones who make the money. The poorest people who do all the damn work to make the money are not part of the growth. That's their argument, isn't it, really? Only the top matters.
Well, it sort of seems to be, because one of the flagship parts of the mini budget was tax cuts for the, getting rid of the 45p income tax rate, which saved sort of £10,000 a year for, I think it was 660,000 of the richest people in Britain. And whereas everything about her tax cutting program was basically weighted to benefit the wealthier more than the poorest, in terms of things like, and also people living in London and the southeast rather than the north and the rest of the country, such as the stamp duty cut, the cuts to income tax, the reversing of the national insurance rise. None of these things are really helping people, and so it's a really confusing path, because on the one hand they've set out this massive energy bill support program, which is universal and is obviously going to help households with their bills this winter, but then they're cutting taxes all over the place that they say is going to stimulate growth, but they don't really explain why. I mean, your point is good, Leslie, but we don't really know why or how that's going to work. And they keep just saying, well, we're going for growth. We're unashamedly pro-growth. But I don't really know what that means for me. And I don't think many people do.
No, exactly. Jacob Rees-Mogg is obviously pro-growth with waistlines. Beyond that, we don't really have any explanations at all. David says there's a perfect storm in the housing market, just as he's inherited his mother's and father's home. There's lots of people who are having a house right now, who have to sell, who have to rent, who have to do something right now because they're moving a job or something else is happening in their lives, and they're going to be actually stuffed by some of the mortgage rates and the interest rates that are changing. Angela says Braverman could be fleeing the impending war in her own third world party. Maybe, yeah, the Tories are all going to be refugees and clamouring to get to Rwanda. That would be interesting, wouldn't it? But very quickly, Lizzie, before we move on to the next story, what do you rate? Because everyone's talking about how long they can last and whether Truss really is going to have to resign or Kwasi is going to have to resign. How long do you think we've got this government for? Are we really looking at 2024?
Very hard to say. 2024 feels like a long time away right now. And I think, it's very hard to predict anything at the moment because there's so much chaos. Events just seem to be unfolding at a rate of knots. But I would say that as things stand at the moment, you wouldn't be able to continue to 2024 at this rate. Liz Truss has to be able to control her party, otherwise she's not going to be able to govern. And you get to a point like in 2019 with Theresa May, where the parliamentary party effectively became ungovernable. She couldn't get anything through Parliament, and eventually she had to resign.
Yes.
And so if Liz Truss can't get this together, if she can't discipline the party, reassure them that she's in control, then they're going to have to think very seriously about what they do, because ultimately, Liz Truss can call an election if she wants, but they're not going to want to do that because they're going to think that they're going to lose. But also, she may run out of options if she isn't able to do anything. And, some Tories are already submitting letters of no confidence to the 1922 committee, but I just don't see how they can have a third leader this year. I just don't think the public will wear that. And so
I can see when they go back to Parliament in the very near future that they won't be able to get the legislation through necessary for the budget.
Yeah.
Labour would start tabling votes of no confidence, and they just take one a week until eventually the Tories and the backbenchers go, no, you're right. Yeah.
And not being able to, voting against a budget is a confidence issue. Anyone who did that would anyway expect to lose the whip. And the party chairman was threatening everyone at the weekend that they were going to lose the whip, which means you're no longer a Conservative MP, you sit as an independent. But if enough of them decide that they're going to do that, then they're not going to take the whip from 80 people. And so...
Yeah, exactly. They would have to, wouldn't they? They would end up with nobody left to whip. Yeah. And then the Tory MPs who wanted to save their seats and their jobs might go, well, I'm going to be independent of this lot until it's sorted out in the future. Interesting times that we live in.